This is the final report for my personal project. The main goal of my personal project was to land on the moon and return back to Earth in the Kerbal Space Program simulator. This was my final successful attempt at getting into orbit of the closest moon. Although I did not complete my primary goal, this project was a learning experience. In the end, I ended up completing 4.5 out of my 7 milestones to reach in the simulator. My first goal, other than setting up my recording software and completing the tutorials, was to create a rocket that is visually appealing. My second goal was to achieve flight so that I could complete the rest of my objectives. My third objective was to create a rocket that would allow me to reach into orbit and exit the atmosphere. My fourth objective, that I finally completed after hours of hard work and slow but sure progress, was to reach the moon's orbit. I only did that 4 times. My fifth and most difficult goal was to land on the moon. I only did it once, but I landed too quickly and the shuttle blew up. Right now, I travel to the main map and I set a maneuver node on the Apophysis, which is the furthest point of orbit of what you're orbiting. The maneuver node will show me where I need to go and how close to the node I will need to go to expand my orbit, and this will help me reach the moon. About right now, it doesn't really look like I'm doing anything, but I'm readjusting my nav ball in the middle of the screen, on the bottom. I'm trying to readjust it so that the cursor in the middle of the nav ball is over the blue thing, which just got right there. That means I am on point to where my theoretical orbit, or my theoretical line is, the orange line. I'm trying to get in line with that by using thrust as soon as I come across that blue icon on the nav ball. Earlier, when I was talking about my objectives and goals for this project, I only missed one, mainly. My rocket, well, missed 1.5 technically. My rocket didn't necessarily land on the moon safely, and the other goal that I missed was the returning from the moon goal. It wasn't able to return to the moon because, well, it didn't really land on the moon in a safe sort of manner where it could lift off again. As of right now, I deleted the node and placed it on the Apophysis again so I could extend my orbit more, so I could reach the moon's orbit. And it was actually kind of difficult to match the moon's orbit because you have 3 planes of view to see your theoretical orbit to the moon's orbit, and yeah, it was pretty difficult to see that. In the video you can see me readjusting my screen just to see if the orange circle matches the pinkish circle, just to see if the orange line is close enough to the purple or pink line to get close enough to the theoretical where the moon is going to orbit and get into the moon's orbit without missing it or being too far or too close. Because sometimes if you're in the wrong point of view, the moon or the orbit looks like it's barely hitting the moon, but when you're above it, when your point of view is bird's eye view, it's actually really, really far away. So that was actually a problem for me. Another very similar problem that I had in my process was if I was looking on it bird's eye view, and then if I looked at it horizontal, not from behind the planet or facing the planet, it would not be at the right height like it is right now. And right now I'm just fast forwarding and seeing if it's gonna actually get into the moon's orbit, but it's clearly not. So right now I'm readjusting the nodes so that it will be able to reach into the orbit of the moon and is on the right y-axis. But every time I readjust my actual orbit, the blue line, it will waste fuel and use up fuel, so I won't be able to make it back from the moon with enough fuel, and I won't have enough fuel to even lift off from the moon or get into a good enough orbit for the moon or anything like that. So basically, no fuel equals you're going nowhere, and that's not really a good thing in the middle of space, because space is not really good, and there's no oxygen, and you die in space. So yeah, that's good news. But that's the whole point, that this is a simulator, so you don't go to space and run out of fuel and die, and all that not really so good stuff. So anyway, right here I'm adjusting my orbit, and any second now I will get it, and we will be good. After finally readjusting my orbit enough to get into the moon's orbit, I go and then I slow down, and eventually I reach the moon's orbit. When the moon comes around and when I fast forward, and I have a point set so that I will get closer in the orbit, and it's on the moon's prapsis, which is the farthest point from the moon on its orbit. So I readjust that, and there's a theoretical orbit right there, which shows an apophis and a paraposis, which is basically the farthest point and the closest point, which means it's full circle of the orbit. So that's usually a good thing to have. A few seconds ago I missed the other orbit, and you don't really need to worry if you miss the orbit, because you can always go around again, except you have to wait and readjust the node, because every time the moon's in a different spot, and every time you gotta readjust it if the moon's in a different spot. So finally I end up getting on the moon, or getting near the moon's orbit, and it's all good once I get into the moon's orbit. So here's the final stretch, and right here you can see the line of where I'm going goes right to the orbit, and then I let go of my fuel, and I'm almost out of fuel. So that's practically it. I just go around the orbit a few times and try to adjust it, but I can't really adjust it. So that's the conclusion. I practically ended up on all the times I got into orbit of the moon. I didn't have enough fuel, and if I didn't reach orbit, I didn't have enough fuel to reach orbit, and it's kind of a repeating process, and that's not really too good of news. So yeah. And the more fuel that I tried to add to my ship, the worse off the balance was, and it kept on getting top heavy, or didn't really balance too well, and kept on falling right upon liftoff and kept on exploding, and that's not really a good thing. Getting this far in the project made me realize that this is way more difficult than I thought, and it extended my knowledge about the subject, and I knew how difficult this must be for actual astronauts to determine the trajectory of where they're going to go, and determine their fuel, and decide if they have enough fuel to go where they need to go. Again, I did not reach my end goal, and I did not land on the moon. I did not make it back from the moon, but this whole process did improve my knowledge on the subject, and I would like to do further more practice on creating rockets and exploring space and learning more about like physics and aerodynamics and aeronautics and all that good stuff. Overall, this was a really fun experience for me, even though I did stress out a little in the end because I wasn't really able to complete my goal, but at least I learned something and I progressed throughout this, and that was really helpful. knowing that I learned something over all this time working on this. This is one of my earlier attempts where I get into orbit of the moon, get into orbit of the Earth, and this is the one where I actually hit the moon. So that's not necessarily a good thing. It just managed to happen. But I thought I would put this in there just to show how I reached the moon, but reached it a little too quickly. So anyway, yeah, here it is.